People will show up in the next 20 minutes. We've got plenty going on.
How long are you planning this to be?
Hopefully it'll be a 20-minute presentation and then maybe 20 to 30 minutes of discussion
About
after.
an hour.
You know, if people, about an hour. I'm shooting for a little less than an hour in case we want to talk about a lot, but it's always easy to push this on. People will show up in the next 20 minutes. Okay. So YouTube is going, and I'm going to start this presentation. So you can hopefully see the screen here now. And welcome everyone to this presentation. This is going to be a presentation and discussion about the housing chapter of Lafayette's general plan. I'm Jeremy Levine, for those that don't know me. I'm one of Inclusive Lafayette's board members, and we're going to start with a 20-minute presentation, fingers crossed I can keep it that short, about housing, and then transition into an open-ended discussion about the kinds of improvements that we want to see to Lafayette's housing laws. So before I launch into anything, this is an educational presentation, but a quick disclosure, I'm not a housing expert, nor am I a journalist. I've learned everything I know from reading documents and talking to local officials. I have no planning experience and no credentials. And I also have an agenda. I want Lafayette to build more housing. So I'm going to try my best to give an accurate and unbiased presentation about the relevant information. And I will try to be explicit, as transparent as I can when I'm presenting information that is trying to push my narrative. So without further ado, let's get this thing started. The first place to begin is normally the basics. What the heck is a general plan? A general plan is essentially a city's constitution. Lafayette has had two general plans throughout its history. It's required by California state law for every city to have one. And the general plan governs everything that a city has authority over. They're updated approximately every 20 years. And when we talk about general plans, we often talk about housing elements, a kind of weird jargon element, which really just means chapter. And when we're talking about a housing element, it's one of 7 required chapters that every general plan has to have. You can see those chapters here. And the housing element that we have has a few different portions. You can see it lays out the city's priorities, talks about background and data, and it talks about the regional housing needs allocation, which we'll come back to, but the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA as it is called for short, is essentially a number of units the state gives ultimately every city to build. The housing element also talks about the governmental and non-governmental constraints to housing development. So on the governmental side, this would be like regulations that prevent as much housing development as possible. On the non-governmental side, it would be like community opposition. And then at the very end, the housing element lays out some specific policies that the city should implement in order to achieve the goals of the general plan. So we're going to go through most of the first 5 parts of
excuse me, Jeremy, we're not seeing this on our screen. Are you showing something? We see a still picture of you and me and Jessica.
That is very weird. It says I'm screen sharing, but it doesn't, One sec. What about now?
Oh. No.
This is very weird. It says that screen sharing is paused. Okay, this is a good example of some embarrassing Zoom stuff. Let me try this one more time. Oops. Okay, I had a presentation going that whole time, so that probably didn't come across very clearly. Can you see now?
Okay, now I'm seeing contents of the last housing element continued.
That's the worst. Okay, I'm gonna have to go on YouTube. But can you still see the
same thing? Contents of the last housing element.
Okay,
4, 5, and 6.
I guess we don't get to record this. Okay, one sec. I'm gonna try just recording to this computer. Nope, it does not let me record and share at the same time. All right, this is a tech snafu. We're just gonna have to start this over and then, well, not start it over. Well, I'll just continue on with the presentation. We're just not gonna have a recording. So just flipping very quickly through all these nifty slides I had. This was the Constitution, general plan, and a housing element, the 7 different portions. Priorities, background and data, RHNA, and the next half of what's in the general plan. But thank you for interrupting me, Carol. That would have been sad if you listened to me go on for 20 minutes without seeing a single thing that I was saying. So these are the stated priorities in Lafayette's general plan. This is what it says. It's text straight out of the general plan and or the housing element. And this is what our city wants to achieve with the housing element. They then, and this is the very first section, they then have a ton of different data about what housing looks like. And I'm just going to show some of the graphs. You can see Lafayette's population grew by almost 300% from 1960 to 1970. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but over here, since 1980, our population has been pretty much exactly the same. So at the same time, we've seen household numbers increase, but the population has been very stable. Some of the, a brief intermission is that Lafayette incorporated the same year, 1968, as the Federal Fair Housing Act. And as you right after 1968, our population started growing way more slowly than it had done before. So this is a good example of where I'm pushing my agenda by trying to make the connection between restrictive housing supply and us having no longer been allowed to segregate. So just looking at a little more detailed at Lafayette's population, this is an interesting chart, I thought. It doesn't totally match the table here. It has growth at a little different time, but it adds up to pretty much the same number of people living here by 2010. And you can see after 2010, we've started to build a lot more housing. So some of the other data that the general plan has is it looks at household characteristics, and they have a lot of other levels of data here, but the main ones they show are ethnicity on this particular table. This matches up with census data that I've used in the past, which shows that Lafayette, as of today, is 80% white and less than 1% African American. And similarly, you can see, not similarly, but you can see a table that shows all of the units, the housing units that were built in Lafayette from 1980 to 2013. And you'll see that it's almost 3 times more single family units than multifamily units were built. So we were building homes into the hills, we were destroying natural environment rather than building apartments in our downtown core. This is another time where I'm pushing an agenda rather than just presenting the unbiased information of this table, which is just some numbers about the units built. And continuing down, you can see not just the types of units built, but also the overall proportion of those units. And Lafayette is predominantly single family housing. It has been since incorporation, and the numbers have barely budged. Between 2000 and 2010, the proportions shifted a little bit, and I think that if you looked at the numbers today, you'd see that they'd shifted a little bit more toward multifamily housing, because we have built mostly apartments in the past few years, but it's still leans very heavily single family. And then one of the last things that the general plan or the housing element does when it's looking at just the characteristics of housing is it considers special needs housing and talks about specific things the city can do to help benefit special needs groups. And so there are these 6 categories specified that are different special needs groups. And all of the first 5 are real groups that are in Lafayette right now. We don't have any farmland. We used to have a lot more farmland, but now we don't. So we just have the 6th category that's kind of a holdover from the past, and we could always add new categories. Now, moving past some of that data, it starts to look at housing affordability. And this in particular is a table that is looking at metropolitan statistical areas. So that means that it's not just the cities mentioned in the, this here that are being featured in the data. It's much larger regions. Contra Costa is part of the San Francisco, San Mateo, Redwood City MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. And believe it or not, it's the least affordable of California's regions. And California as a whole is infamously not that affordable. So this graph indicates, it's not specific to Lafayette, but it suggests that we, like most of our region, have housing that is not affordable to the median income in our area, and median incomes are higher in our area. So it's clearly a real problem, and people can go back and forth about how big the housing shortage is, but there's nothing really to deny about the fact that there's a massive shortage and people are paying the price for it, literally. The high cost of housing within Lafayette is pretty blinding also. If you're just looking specifically in our community, the median sales price is 1.15 million, and that's the median. The mean, if you're looking at a different kind of average, is significantly higher because we have some homes that are really, really valuable. And it's considered that if somebody wants to afford just even a condo in Lafayette, they need to have over $100,000 in income. Not a very middle-class community. In fact, the median area income of Contra Costa is about $107,000. That's the median income of our whole county. So essentially, you have to be at the median or above for Lafayette to be considered affordable if you live in Contra Costa. The other part of, well, not the other part, another really big part of the general plan when they're looking at, right now we're at the part where it's constraints to housing supply, are these regulations that the housing element lays out about what can be built and where. I'm not going to go over all the details of this table. I recommend looking at it in your spare times, though, because this table does outline all of the laws that govern what can be built and where in different zoning regions of Lafayette. And we'll come back to a map that reflects some of these. But these numbers are something that if we want to get more housing in Lafayette, we need to change these numbers. So moving along, there are some state laws that are going to affect this next housing element that were not in place for the last one. A lot of them have only been passed in the past 5 years as the housing crisis has gotten increasingly, well, politically tense and important to people. So the first of these parking laws is AB 2923, which is going to allow BART, force cities essentially to rezone all BART property that is within a half mile of the BART stations. So this is by the end of 2022, cities must have rezoned their parking lots. You can see this is a satellite view, a Google Maps view of the parking lots. And people think this is going to destroy our small town charm. I don't happen to think the parking lots are that charming. I think that they are kind of dumpy, but we're all entitled to our own opinions. And that's the main timeline that Lafayette is on in this housing element, is the timeline set out by AB 2923, saying you must rezone these parking lots to allow a minimum of 5 stories and I think 50 feet to be built in these parking lots. So that's going to be a big battle in Lafayette that it's a fight we can't win. The state has already mandated we redo that development. Now, there's another major law that is going to impact our general plan and the housing element, which is RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation that I mentioned earlier. Just refresher, RHNA is an allocation of housing that the state gives to cities. It doesn't actually give them directly to cities, but that process is a little more complicated than we need to get into here. The state gives housing requirements to cities to allow to be built. So the city isn't building the housing, the city is allowing it to be built. And in the last RHNA cycle, which was 2014, it's going to end at the end of 2022, Lafayette was required to demonstrate that we had space to build at least 400 units. And RHNA specifically gives different categories for what kinds of units need to be built for different levels of income. And those income levels are determined by Section 8 is of the US Housing Act. So that it's essentially just affordable housing at different prices. And a very low income is if you're at below 50% of the area median income. Low income is if you're 50 to 80% of the area median income. Moderate is 100 to 120%, and above moderate is above 120%. So a reminder, the area median income in Contra Costa is about 107,000. But if you're getting very low income housing, then that's like, $53,000, $54,000 that people should be able to afford. Pretty reasonable, pretty middle class, I would say. And well, there's hardly anyone who's middle class in Lafayette anymore. So we actually can see how much progress we've made on our current RHNA cycle. And these numbers are as of December 31st, 2019. So they're almost a year old, but they represent about halfway through our RHNA cycle where we were, and we'd actually made pretty good progress. If you add to these numbers the fact that we approved the Terraces of Lafayette, which had 63 low-income units, and some other developments we approved, we're actually getting pretty close to having met our RHNA allocation for everything but very low-income housing, which is just pretty hard to beat. But the next RHNA cycle is going to be different than this last one. A new state law, SB 828, changed the way that the numbers are calculated for the amount of houses that need to be built in California. And so the number more than doubled from what it was last time. The Contra Costa's numbers are, well, yeah, you can see all the numbers on the side there. Lafayette, which had to build about 400 units last time, is now expected to, not build, but approve room for 400 units. Lafayette is now expected to approve room for over 1,600 units. So this is a really big change. I think it's a little, redundant for me to say, and it's going to be a challenge to find space to zone for this many units. If you looked at Lafayette now, based on the current zoning regulations and the rules about what can be built, it would be impossible for us to zone for this much. Fortunately, we're updating the housing laws now, so we can zone for it. Now, there's this final law, I think I might have had another one, SB 35, recently passed, which means that cities that fail to meet their RHNA allocation, cities that by the end of a cycle have not had enough housing built at the various levels of affordability, will lose control over their permitting processes. So SB 35 essentially penalizes cities for failing to build or allow for enough affordable housing and takes away their local control. In the past, cities ignored RHNA and there was no penalty for it. Now, if cities ignore RHNA, they will be forced to build housing in places they don't want it. So it's really important now, in a way that it has not been previously, that we meet our RHNA allocations as much as we can. And that's why there's a big debate in Lafayette about local control and our ability as a city to do what we want versus the state's ability as a ward, that essentially the governing institution that allows the cities to exist, and the state's ability to tell those cities what to do. And we want to preserve our local control. We want to make sure that we can do what we want. And in order to do so, SB 35, this, the RHNA's teeth, as I call it, is going to make it so we probably want to meet our RHNA allocations as best we can. If we don't meet them perfectly, the state will probably be lenient. If we don't try to meet them at all, well, we'll probably face penalties. And at the end of the day, we should want to build more housing. This is a graph of housing prices in the San Francisco metropolitan statistical area, so it includes Contra Costa, versus the United States. And from 1980 to today, housing prices in the San Francisco metropolitan statistical area increased by a factor of 7. In the rest of the country, it was by a factor of 3. So it's natural for housing prices to go up. It's a little weird for them to go up so much more rapidly than elsewhere, especially if you're looking after 2010, when they've gone up really, really rapidly, especially in a period where California's population wasn't growing that much. We grew a lot from 1980 to 2010. 2010 to 2020, we grew a little, but not so significantly, yet housing prices have skyrocketed. So it suggests a lot of underbuilding of housing over a long period of time, and people are suffering. They can't afford to live here, and they're getting priced out, and people who are struggling in work here are, well, not getting to use their money as well as they could because they have to spend a lot on rent. This is another comparison of housing prices, and this only goes back to the mid-90s, so it's not as good, and I wasn't that careful with it, but essentially it shows housing prices are 4 times more than the rest of the country on average in the SF metropolitan area. So again, there are disputes about where the housing should go and how the state should do it, but there isn't really any dispute to be had about the fact that these prices are not affordable to a lot of people. And if we want affordable prices, then we need more housing. That's just simple economics. So there are a few things that we can do to this general plan that I've listed here. And I think that I should have probably done more for this slide, but this is just a general outline of some of the things that I hope that we can be thinking about. And there's also this map, which the general plan lays out. It's pretty hard to see, which is unfortunate, but I'll put a link on the presentation and you can all look at that another time if you want. Essentially, this map outlines our zoning code. So it doesn't say exactly what can be built and where, but it says approximately what can be built and where. It sets limits on what the zoning code can allow. And changing this map, drawing new lines, shading things in differently, can totally transform the amount of housing that Lafayette is capable of having built within its boundaries. Right now, this map sets a lot of restrictions that make housing pretty difficult. And you can see it's kind of difficult to do so, but right in this downtown corridor, apartments are allowed, apartments and at a certain height, that's like 3 stories. The minute that you leave this little sliver of Lafayette, which in total is less than 3% of Lafayette's land, it's all single family zoning, So there are many reasons for that. It's not just arbitrary restrictiveness. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to build in the hills, but there's a discussion to be had about where maybe it would make sense to build that we have to have because we have to zone as legally required by the state for more housing. So there are some guidelines. I don't really know what I put that slide in there for because this is actually the end of the presentation. I'd like to transition into a discussion. So I think a good starting point for the discussion is, what do we think about the city's housing priorities? Seems a little that this is the place to start when we're going to think about what we want to change in the housing element. So I can't necessarily see all who's here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless people would like to continue seeing this, but I think it's probably better if we just have a conversation here, and I'm going to send these bullet points into the notes here so everyone can see them. First of all, I guess before we move right into the discussion, did anybody have any questions from that presentation? It was a lot of information pretty fast, and it was still longer than I wanted it to be, so pardon me.
I have a quick question about I think it's the Association of Bay Area Governments, right? ABAG?
ABAG, yeah.
What is their role in determining RHNA numbers?
Great question. So I had skipped over this part because I thought it would be too nitty gritty, but I like to talk about it. So essentially, it's kind of a weird way that RHNA works. Instead of giving the state, it's really the Housing and Community Development Department of the state. They calculate how much housing California should have, and they take those numbers and give them to the regional coalitions of cities. And so ABAG, that the Bay Area just got, well, we don't know for sure, but it's expected that they will get about 440,000 units that they're supposed to build in this next cycle. And it's given that number, ABAG has already been planning to probably give Lafayette 1,600 units. They're not sure. There's some challenges being put forward to HCD's, that Housing and Community Development's calculations about our housing need. But there's a good chance that these are the numbers that we're going to end up with. And so ABAG gets a number from the state, 440,000, and then distributes it among the cities. As you can imagine, there's a lot of politics there. Lafayette has done a good job at not having to build as much as other cities have in the past. And some cities like Danville have been even better at avoiding their housing responsibility. We got Benji joining us here. Any other questions about the presentation? All right, sweet. Hey, Daniel, good to see you. So in that case, we can move into, talking about the priorities of the city. Can everyone sees in the chat the housing element introductory priorities? Here, Dan, well, I'll try sending them again.
Mm-hmm.
All right, has everyone gotten them now?
Yes.
All right, great.
Well, what are we supposed to be getting? My screen is not just people on my screen.
You should, if you should at the bottom of your screen have a chat, a button that says chat.
Oh yeah.
And if you click on that, then you'll see I just sent the information about Lafayette's housing supply. Not house, excuse me, about the priorities of the housing element.
Ooh, wait a minute, I'm way off here. What has happened here? Oh, there, okay, chat. Oh, okay. You are looking for comments or?
Yeah, it's anybody can say. I mean, I was just giving people a minute to read the priorities really quickly because I figured not everyone maybe had reviewed my presentation when I sent it this morning. Yeah, anyone can jump in. I was thinking about going one by one through the group, but I don't really like doing that. It's kind of I don't know, I feel like it puts people on the spot. Kind of mean.
Well, I will say, if you listen to city council meeting, there apparently is a very great questioning of those numbers, the methodology that was used. And I think a lot of people that know about all that are questioning it. So what's going to happen with those numbers, I'm not sure. We'll have to see, but that doesn't change, what we would like Lafayette to be like. But
you're definitely right. I think that, there's going to be a negotiating process about these numbers. I've looked into it. I think that the people who want the state to change its numbers don't have a very strong case, which, I'm biased here, but I would be scared if they did. And I'm not feeling that scared, let's say. The numbers have their reasonable concerns with them.
They questioned how they calculated vacancy, and because a big question, how come it got so much bigger? What changed in the methodology? That's
a good question. What changed was SB 828 passed and intentionally said we're going to make the allocation 200% of what we think it needs to be because we need to get more housing. And people don't like SB 828, so that's a different discussion entirely. But just for now, looking at the mission of the housing element, any initial thoughts about changes, additions? There's one that immediately occurred to me when I first saw this. Oh, go ahead, Benji.
Well, what occurred to me is the first two are about like maintaining and preserving and retaining the character instead of like making them better. It seems like NIMBYism is sort of baked into it, of like don't do anything new in our
I think the point about retaining the characters is the one that popped out to me. I don't know exactly what that means. So I don't know if they clarified further. But yeah, that's probably the part of the mission statement that's the most vague for me. So I don't really understand that point.
They don't define it later.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's whatever the character means to whoever's interpreting it, which is a good issue. I happen to think it says, the mission is achieve adequate supply of safe, decent housing for all residents. Why not add present and future? Why make it just to the current residents when we know we're going to have future residents?
Are these from the general plan?
Yes, these are straight out of the housing element.
And
are we looking into rewriting it right now, or are we thinking about just like?
We're thinking. We're thinking about what we want to change, and we're rewriting it. It's open-ended discussion, whatever anybody wants to say. This is just the first of several meetings I hope to have like this, so I don't expect we're going to come up with a ton of definitive answers right now. So would people like a little more time looking at these, or are we feeling like, yeah, we've looked at this enough, we can come back to it, and we can move on to other questions that I have?
Could I say something here?
Please.
Okay, before the first four, first four bullets, Okay, yeah, you have the mission. It says the single most important goal of the Lafayette Housing Chapter is to achieve an adequate supply. That's what you have, safe, decent housing for all residents of Lafayette. So the single most important goal of the housing element is to achieve an adequate supply of safe, decent housing for all residents. And I'm not quite sure. For all residents, well, if you're a resident, you already live here. So I think what we're talking about is for new people who can afford to live here. They're not a resident. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So you'd want to change that statement, I would think.
Yes, definitely.
For all residents of Lafayette, you'd want to say for all people, maybe.
Yeah, I think that kind of change would be great, just in redefining what this is really about.
I like that. For all people.
For all people.
That is Lafayette's housing goals.
Any thoughts about the last 2 points from anyone?
Down at the bottom?
Yes.
Are those regional housing needs allocations coming from the state?
Yeah, that's the RHNA, which I talked about in the presentation. And those will be, yeah, it's they had to put that line in there that they're planning for RHNA. It's pretty much required. I would think it should say something about going beyond RHNA if they're going to just plan for it. Then it doesn't have to be about going beyond RHNA. It's like finding sustainable places to put more housing or something.
Maybe you could talk about like the environment and sustainability, like building sustainably and in an environmentally friendly manner. Like have our housing reflect our values. I don't know.
That's a good, I think it would be a great point. Does anybody else have ideas for additions? You don't need to have the specific language now. It's like, oh, maybe what is this missing?
I feel like it's missing the history of overt and implicit bias that has informed who lives in Lafayette and the need to correct that intentionally, correct it in, welcoming, a more diverse or inclusive community.
I like that.
That's a great point. I think it would be really important to add a line that's just saying, maybe something about correcting past discrepancies or something, or past.
Yeah, because all you have to do is look at that chart with 80% white people living here, and that's all the proof you need.
Yeah, one would think. One would think.
One would hope.
You could even talk about, reference some of the explicit policies like housing covenants that, we know they were here. We're not confident about green lining or red lining, but we know, we've seen the housing covenants. People have them in their deeds still.
Mm-hmm.
So I am taking notes on everything that we're saying here, but again, none of this, I don't imagine tonight being the definitive meeting where we figure out what we want that text to look like. It's mostly a brainstorming session, and then we'll be able to come back to the nitty gritty in future meetings. Is there just a quick aside, because I meant to ask this earlier, is everybody on Inclusive Lafayette's mailing list? Did you see the email that we sent out a few days ago? Okay, if you're not,
I don't think I am.
About what?
it was just our first email blast, so we were sending out
the letter, the newsletter.
Yeah, the newsletter,
Yes.
Exactly.
How
Daniel,
do I get on that?
there's a sign up form. I'll send that to you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's a new news blast, so it's not or a new newsletter, so it's not anything too crazy. But yeah, there will be. I just asked because I think that's the main. Well, I'll probably post about things on Facebook too, but we're trying to move toward organizing more things over email. It's nice.
That's good.
Yeah, feel a little more professional and less like, means I have to be on Facebook less, not the biggest fan of Facebook. So let's come back. Well, okay, before I move on, final thoughts on any of these points, additions, changes. I know a lot of this stuff is new, so it'd be worth coming back to in the future and revisiting it again.
So is the goal to create a draft that that's sent to the committee that's working on the general plan, or maybe? So I joined late. Sorry. So what's the overall goal?
No, it's actually a great question, because I forgot to say this what we're doing here. I just launched into the presentation. We're here to discuss what we want to see in the general plan, and then the end goal is to have a draft. It may just be a list of changes and additions rather than a full draft. I'll have to think about what's more effective. Does anyone have ideas between those two? A list of insertions and edits versus, just our own draft with whatever changes we want inserted?
Probably the first thing you mentioned. I don't know how like their process of drafting the plan works, but yeah, I think probably the first thing that you mentioned would be better.
What is that? What?
We should find out if they're planning on scrapping and starting over, or just making changes.
This is the first one, Carol, was the just a list of changes and additions rather than a full document with.
That's what Daniel meant by the first one.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I had a few other questions for this meeting that I'd put together, and I'm just going to share my screen again so we can look at those, because they're good questions. I think I didn't think about them enough. So I think the first major question, and probably the most important for us to answer as a group, is what density should be allowed in Lafayette? What do we feel like belongs in our community? And that is a totally open-ended question. It could be 20-story skyscrapers. It could be 3-story townhouses. Or I guess that would make sense for 1-story townhouses, but it's an open-ended discussion. And on this one, I actually do want to go around the circle because it's a little more clear. You don't need to necessarily give a height or a units per acre or a stories, but just at least a general sentiment of how big you think buildings should be in Lafayette. So I'll start just in order of people who were on the meeting. So we can start with Carol.
Well, I don't think you can quite answer that question that way. Because what is very important to a lot of people here is the view of the hills, green hills. That's our motto. So when we talk, I was on the second general plan. And this is a big question because the view sheds are very important. So, and you know, they're all mapped in town, and development they govern a lot of the development. So you really have to say where you're going to put these, I think. You know, and you have to discuss whether the views of the hills, how important are they to our community? And then that determines where you're going to put the high-rise buildings. I'm sure they go somewhere, but where? And you might be able to put a higher density where there's no view, or the view isn't as important. But that's one of the things that governs the downtown development. What view does it obstruct? So I don't think you can just say maximum density and all by itself.
That's a really good point. I should have clarified what I meant by the question, because I wasn't thinking maximum density across all of Lafayette. I was thinking of maximum density anywhere at Lafayette. So if we just assume we're looking at, you know, just thinking about, sorry, that was a really unclear explanation now. It was, or it's like, think about the place where we would allow the highest density. We don't need to know what that place is to say what's the density we'd be comfortable seeing there, wherever it is. Is that more clear?
No, I think that's exactly the problem is, and I think it still is for most people, is where are you blocking the view? And which view are you blocking? If you block the view of Mount Diablo, that's very important to people. If you block the view of, well, I don't know, south from Trader Joe's or something, that's not as sacred as the view of Mount Diablo. So again, it's where is this density going to be? This was one of the big things with Steve Cortese's building. I mean, it blocked the views. He's lucky he got the height that he did, but it would be nice to say, well, I don't know where you would say you would put more density. If you're talking about high-rise density, we have no land left to build on, really. So I don't think, 35. We're not talking about housing developments. We're really talking about high-rise buildings. So where do we want to see that? One of the big things, and we walked it all, is where CVS is and Diablo Foods, all those, that whole strip down to Trader Joe's. When people are all in there and you block the view to the north, oh my, that was that was very, very controversial. So again, where are you going to put this? I think it's fine to say we should study having higher density, but where? We should study where. Where could it go? I don't think you can just say we should allow more. More where?
And that's very reasonable. I actually, so this will be a precursor for the end of the meeting, but my big scheme was to send everybody a link to the general plan map and say that for the next conversation, we should come back with the where, and people, brainstorm about where we could change zoning rules and make suggestions for where the city should study. So it sounds like maybe we should answer that question before launching into the density question, I was thinking I could skip a step and just talk about density. Does anybody else have thoughts about what Carol just said?
You really should walk the town and look. That's what we did.
Mhm.
That might be the next meeting then. There was one thing that really amused me just really quickly was I mean the idea of everyone protesting CVS and Trader Joe's. Like, yeah, those have clearly made our lives a lot worse and really caused a lot of problems for our town. So, you know, I don't know, maybe in hindsight, people would see their opposition to things doesn't make sense. Or maybe the people who live behind those buildings are still really mad about it. Who knows? Daniel, had you been about to say something?
I was just confused for a sec because I didn't fully detect the sarcasm. But I got it now.
Yeah, sorry, it was pretty deadpan. So I guess the
Wait, I have just a quick question. Sorry. Yeah, like Carol was saying, I think we would need to look more closely at a map to determine the ideal maximum density and where. But I also just had a kind of a procedural question about the general plan. Who approves it? Because I just want to get a sense of like what political forces we're facing. Is it the city council? Is it the planning commission?
That's a good question. It will go through them both, and ultimately the city council will approve the general plan. They'll probably take most of the planning commission suggestions, I would guess, and the planning commission will probably take many of the general plan action committee's suggestions. That's the citizen group that's managing the first step of this process. But the planning commission and the city council will both, you know, they'll make their tweaks and then final approval comes from the city council.
Okay. And then as
did I get that right, Carol?
Well, there's a great effort going to be made to survey all aspects of the city. There's a list of stakeholders, and it includes just about every group, organized or otherwise, that you can think of. And there will be meetings of those groups. There'll be surveys of, you know, what those groups think. Inclusive Lafayette is one of them, and what they would like to see on all aspects of the general plan, all the elements, one by one as they're taken. So the city plans to have a great deal of citizen input on this. This was why I mentioned the views. There are a lot of people for whom that's very sacred. So, you know, everyone, the library, everyone Chamber of Commerce, everyone you can think of, and all the neighborhood groups, there are about 44 neighborhood associations, they're all in it. So it isn't something the committee will decide all by themselves and then pass it on. It will be an amalgamation of what citizens think.
Mm-hmm. And given that there's so many groups that will provide input, how many groups, or, you know, I guess to what extent, you know, do they hold a lot of power in this community? I guess what I'm asking is, are there opportunities for aligning ourselves or creating like coalitions with other groups who are like-minded with Inclusive Lafayette, and bringing more power behind our asks?
Sure. Oh yeah, that's, of course.
Yes, there are definitely opportunities for coalitions, and at the very least, I'm hoping Sustainable Lafayette will jump on board with us, because they did a candidate forum with us in the past, and we're pretty closely aligned. But they're also probably the most powerful organizations in Lafayette is the Homeowners Council, which is all of those neighborhood associations banded together, and the Chamber of Commerce. and they're the most powerful because they represent the most people, really pretty simply. So that was, and it's another great question, because these are all things that I had thought, that the mapping and looking at the map was something I thought we should do at the end, and the maybe assigning groups to reach out to and start discussions with. I'm really looking to sucker people who aren't board members into getting more involved. So that's my agenda here. But it's totally voluntary. It's not, it's supposed to be less responsibility than a board member and simply focused on the GPAC stuff. So we're reaching the point where I want to close down this meeting and move on. So I am going to send an email to everyone here, if that's all right with you. And that email will contain a link to the general plan map. It will contain a Google Sheet with a list of some of the potential stakeholders we could reach out to. And that will be members of the GPAC and organizations that are going to get involved. And it will be a list that you can edit, so anyone can add other ideas for people to reach out to. And then part of that Google that sheet will let people sign up for who they want to talk to. And then in probably 3 or 4 weeks, I mean, in two weeks or so, I'll reach out with information about maybe a little socially distanced walk around town, a surveying walk, and we can meet then and discuss the map, discuss stakeholders. How does that sound to everybody here?
Good. I think it would be good, Jeremy, if you put the list of stakeholders up on your website, your Facebook page.
Yes, I will definitely do that.
Yeah, people can see.
Okay, and yeah, I mean, I'll be putting that up. I'll be trying to get even people who weren't at this meeting to get involved. And they don't even have to be, I just want everyone involved, inclusive Lafayette or no. It's like, as Carol said, this is supposed to be an amalgamate. God, I shouldn't have tried to say that word. It's going to be a combination of everyone in town who wants to get involved, and it should be, because it is the plan for our community. So any final thoughts?
Yes, I hope you're going to do the other elements as well, because they do all tie together. They tie together to make Lafayette what people would like it to be. It's difficult to take just one all by itself as though nothing else exists.
Absolutely.
It's a total plan for the community.
Well, there's my plug. In 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at land use, and it will be kind of similar to this presentation. So, there will be some introductions. We'll go through the land use portion, and then we'll have the most abstract of discussions about the priorities. And hopefully it'll be a little more cleverly organized, because now I have some feedback from this meeting and some ideas for how things could be changed a little bit. But at least we'll look at land use, and hopefully, I mean, those are the two that they're going to look at first, and they have to be finished by 2022, the end of 2022. So there's some urgency. The rest of the elements, they're going to take longer. So that will be a priority, but maybe not in the next 6 months, unfortunately. We'll see. There will be, I'm kind of playing this by ear, trying to figure things out as I go. So there will be a lot of planning. Any other final thoughts? All right. Well, thank you for coming to the discussion. It was good to see you all, and I hope that you enjoy your Thanksgiving safely, but also, well, decadently. I feel like we've all deserved a little feast. So,
could I just ask a question of the other two people? When you signed on, when Jeremy sent the email, and it said, Jeremy invites you to the meeting, and is that where you went? You clicked on that, and then I got a Facebook page, it would just blank. I never knew I was registered or anything. I found out from someone else who looked and said, well, you're registered. And Jeremy told me that too. So how did you both register?
I found it on Facebook. I got a notification from Inclusive Lafayette that they were holding a virtual event. And then I didn't register per se. I just indicated that I was going to the event. And then after that, you know, a couple minutes before 6:30, I just clicked on the Zoom link there in the Facebook event.
You didn't get an email back saying you've registered.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a problem, Jeremy.
I will, in the future, I'll share the Zoom link directly because I shared the Facebook link over email, and the Facebook link required signing up on Facebook and then using Zoom to get to this actual meeting. So I did make some unnecessary hoops for people to jump through. It was, the Facebook event was good for Facebook.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other final thoughts?
Keep
All right,
up
well,
the good work.
take care, everyone.
Keep up the good work, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.